It was supposed to be a normal flight from London to Dubai, nothing more than a calm, 7-hour journey across clear skies and endless blue. The airport that morning buzzed with the usual sounds of rolling suitcases, soft chatter, and the metallic voice of the announcer echoing through Terminal 3. Amelia Bennett, just 18, clutched her boarding pass tightly between her fingers, her palms damp with excitement. It was her first solo flight, her first big adventure without her parents by her side. Her mother had hugged her a dozen times at the departure gate, whispering, "Call me as soon as you land, promise." Amelia had laughed nervously and nodded, her heart fluttering with both fear and thrill. The aircraft, a massive Airbus A350, gleamed under the sunlight as passengers began to board. Amelia found her seat by the window, 24A, beside an elderly woman who smiled warmly and asked, "First time flying alone?" Amelia grinned shyly. "Yeah, but I've been studying aviation, so I guess that helps." The woman chuckled softly, patting her hand. "Then we're in good hands, dear." As the engines roared to life, Amelia felt that familiar vibration through the floor, a rhythm she'd always loved. She pressed her forehead to the cool window and watched the world below grow smaller, the buildings turning to tiny blocks, the cars into ants, and the clouds swallowing them whole. The captain's calm voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Weather looks beautiful today, cruising altitude at 36,000 feet, estimated arrival time in Dubai is 6 hours and 50 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." The cabin filled with quiet chatter, the clinking of seatbelts, and the soft hum of engines. For the first 2 hours, everything was perfect. The sky stretched endlessly in every direction, the sunlight streaming like gold through the windows. Flight attendants moved gracefully between aisles, serving drinks and meals. Amelia put on her headphones, the soft notes of her favorite song carrying her into a dreamy calm. She thought about the internship waiting for her in Dubai, her first real step toward becoming a pilot. Her father's words replayed in her mind, "You were born to fly, Amelia." But then, just after lunch was served, something changed. The plane gave a sudden jolt, sharp enough to make her cup of juice tremble. A few passengers laughed nervously, assuming it was light turbulence. The captain's voice came again, still calm but a little tighter this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We're encountering some unexpected turbulence." The laughter faded. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Amelia's instincts kicked in. This wasn't normal. She glanced at the wings outside. They flexed against the wind, but nothing seemed too alarming. Then the plane lurched again, harder this time, throwing a few items off the foldable trays. A child began to cry somewhere behind her. The flight attendants hurried to secure loose items, reassuring passengers with practiced smiles. Amelia tried to steady her breathing, telling herself this was just an air pocket, nothing major. But then came the second announcement, or rather, the lack of one. The intercom crackled, then went silent. A few seconds later, there was a muffled thump from the cockpit. Another jolt, then nothing. The cabin grew eerily quiet, except for the hiss of air conditioning and the occasional rattle of luggage in overhead bins. The seatbelt sign blinked red. A middle-aged man across the aisle frowned, pressing his call button. A flight attendant approached, but before she could speak, the plane dipped sharply to the left, and passengers screamed. Amelia's stomach twisted as gravity shifted, trays crashed to the floor, cups rolled, and oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with a terrifying hiss. The elderly woman beside her gripped Amelia's arm, whispering a prayer. Somewhere near the front, a baby wailed uncontrollably. The attendants struggled to move down the aisle, trying to calm everyone. One of them, her name tag reading, Elena, rushed toward the cockpit door. She knocked, then shouted something no one could hear over the rising noise. When there was no response, she fumbled for the emergency key. The door opened slightly, and she froze. Amelia could only see her expression, pure horror. Elena turned back to the passengers, her face pale, voice trembling as she yelled, "Is there anyone who can fly a plane?" Gasps echoed across the cabin. For a moment, everyone thought it was some cruel joke. A man in a business suit stood up halfway, then sank back into his seat, muttering, "What did she just say?" The woman next to Amelia whispered, "Oh my God." Amelia's heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the chaos. She unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, ignoring the trembling of her hands. She'd trained in simulators. She'd handled small planes before. Never something this massive, but right now, hesitation meant death. She rose to her feet. I can try, she said, her voice barely audible over the noise. Alina's eyes snapped toward her, a flicker of desperate hope igniting there. You can fly, Amelia nodded. I'm a student pilot. I've only trained on Cessnas, but I know the basics. Elena grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the front, pushing through panicked passengers. The aisles felt endless. People shouted questions, others prayed aloud. Someone screamed, "Are we going to die?" Amelia didn't look back. The smell of burnt coffee and fear filled the air. When they reached the cockpit, Amelia saw the two pilots slumped over their controls, oxygen masks dangling uselessly. The captain's hands were limp, his headset half off. The co-pilot wasn't moving either. The instrument panels flashed with angry red warnings, and alarms shrieked in her ears. For a second, she froze. Her throat went dry. The weight of 250 lives pressed on her chest. She whispered to herself, "You can do this, Amelia. You have to." She took the captain's seat, her fingers trembling as she scanned the instruments. Altitude dropping, speed decreasing, autopilot disengaged. She reached for the radio, voice shaking as she pressed the button. "This is Flight 721, both pilots are unconscious. I repeat, both pilots are down. I'm a student pilot. Please, someone respond." There was static, then a calm voice crackled back, "Flight 721, this is London Air Traffic Control." "Copy that, who am I speaking with?" "Amelia Bennett," she replied, fighting to steady her breathing. "I've had basic training. I'll do whatever you tell me." The air traffic controller's tone changed instantly, professional, but filled with urgency. "Okay, Amelia, we're with you. First, engage the autopilot if possible. Do you see the switch labeled AP? It should be near the center console." Her eyes darted across the controls until she found it. She flipped it on, praying it would stabilize the aircraft. The violent shuddering eased slightly, though alarms still blinked. Behind her, Elena stood frozen, one hand over her mouth. She whispered, "Are we safe?" Amelia didn't answer. The plane had leveled out for now, but her pulse still hammered. "Tell the passengers to stay calm," she said softly. "I'll do my best." Elena nodded and hurried back to the cabin. Amelia took a deep breath, staring at the endless stretch of sky ahead. She thought of her mother, probably making dinner back home, not knowing her daughter was thousands of feet above the earth, holding hundreds of lives in her trembling hands. The controller's voice returned. "Amelia, we've got medical personnel on standby in Dubai. You're doing incredibly well. We'll help you bring her down safely." Her eyes flickered to the lifeless pilots beside her, and a tear slipped down her cheek. "Please hurry," she whispered. "They're not moving." Another tremor shook the aircraft, a reminder that she wasn't out of danger yet. Passengers prayed in every language, clutching loved ones, strangers holding hands. And amid all that chaos, an 18-year-old girl sat alone in the cockpit, facing a sky that no longer felt friendly, determined to do the impossible. The sound of the wind howling outside mixed with the rhythmic hum of the engines, a haunting lullaby between life and death. Amelia's gaze hardened. She adjusted her grip on the control yoke, her young face lit by the red glow of warning lights. The flight attendant's voice trembled as it echoed through the speakers, "Is there anyone who can fly a plane?" For a moment, time seemed to stop. The hum of the engines faded into the background, replaced by gasps, whispers, and terrified sobs. The cabin filled with a thick, paralyzing silence. 250 people sat frozen in disbelief, their minds unable to process what they had just heard. The question hung in the air like a cold wind, unreal yet terrifyingly real. Amelia's heart thudded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She looked around. People were staring at each other, searching for someone, anyone, who might raise their hand. A few men looked at the ceiling as if the answer might come from above. Mothers clutched their children. One old man pressed his palms together, whispering a prayer. The elderly woman beside Amelia squeezed her wrist tightly. "Dear, stay in your seat," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. But Amelia couldn't. Her pulse raced, her breathing quickened, her thoughts spun in circles, but at the center of it all, one sentence screamed inside her head, "Do something." She thought of the training flights she'd taken, small, fragile Cessnas gliding through the open sky, her instructor's calm voice guiding her from the seat beside her. She'd always dreamed of being in control of a cockpit, feeling the power of flight in her hands. But never like this, never when hundreds of lives depended on her. The plane rattled again, dipping slightly before steadying itself. The lights flickered, the engines groaned. People screamed. A baby cried. The cabin had turned into a wave of chaos. Amelia stood slowly, her seatbelt falling against the seat with a soft click. Her knees shook, but her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of determination. "I can try," she said, barely louder than a whisper. The flight attendant, Elena, turned around sharply, her eyes desperate. "You can fly." Amelia swallowed hard. "I'm a student pilot. I've trained on small aircrafts, not something this big. But I know the basics." Elena didn't hesitate. "Then come with me." As Amelia stepped into the aisle, dozens of eyes followed her. Someone called out, "She's just a kid." Another voice shouted, "We're doomed." Amelia ignored them. She kept walking, her hands trembling as she gripped the back of each seat to steady herself. Every step felt heavier than the last. The floor vibrated beneath her shoes, the hum of the engines now more like a heartbeat, loud, alive, and fragile. Passengers moved aside as she passed. A mother pulled her daughter close. A man whispered, "God help us." But then, from somewhere near the back, another passenger said softly, "Let her try." It was quiet, but enough to silence the doubt for a second. Amelia's heart filled with a strange mixture of fear and courage. She had no idea if she could do this, but she knew she couldn't walk away. Elena guided her toward the cockpit. The narrow aisle felt like a tunnel that kept stretching longer and longer, each second dragging on. Amelia's mind flashed with memories of her father teaching her to stay calm under pressure, his voice echoing in her head, "Panic kills faster than failure, Amelia. When everything falls apart, breathe and take control." When they reached the cockpit door, Amelia froze. She could hear alarms blaring inside, a sharp, relentless beeping that cut through the chaos. The door stood half open, swinging slightly with the motion of the plane. Elena looked at her, eyes filled with fear but also trust. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Amelia nodded, though her voice didn't come out. She took one last deep breath and stepped inside. The sight that met her made her stomach drop. Both pilots were slumped over their controls, motionless. The captain's headset had fallen to the floor, the microphone sparking faintly against the metal. The co-pilot's hand still rested on the throttle, but his head was bowed forward, unmoving. Oxygen masks hung above them, unused. The smell of burnt circuits and coffee filled the small space. The control panels flashed red and orange, altitude warnings, system alerts, everything screaming danger. Amelia felt her knees weaken. For a moment, she wanted to turn around and run. But then she saw the reflection of her own face in the windshield, terrified, yes, but alive. She whispered to herself, "You can do this. You have to do this." She reached for the captain's seat, gently pulling his limp body back just enough to sit. The leather felt warm, the metal beneath her trembling hands cold and unforgiving. She stared at the hundreds of buttons and dials before her, half of which she'd never seen in real life. Her small plane experience suddenly felt like nothing compared to this ocean of complexity. Elena hovered behind her. "What do we do?" Amelia didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned for the radio, the lifeline that could connect her to someone, anyone, who knew what to do. She found the communications panel and pressed the button. Her voice shook as she spoke. "This is Flight 721. Both pilots are unconscious. I repeat, both pilots are down. I'm a student pilot. Please, someone respond." The static that followed felt like forever. Then, finally, a calm, male voice broke through. "Flight 721, this is London Air Traffic Control. We read you, Amelia. You're doing great. Stay calm. Can you tell us your current altitude?" She glanced at the monitor. 31,000 feet. Altitude's dropping slowly." "Okay, Amelia," the controller said, his tone steady and reassuring. "We're going to help you. You're not alone, understood?" Her throat tightened. "Understood. Good. Now, do you see the switch labeled, AP? That's your autopilot. Flip it on if it's off. That will stabilize the aircraft for now." Her fingers searched the panels until she found it. She pressed the switch, and instantly, the violent shaking eased. The plane leveled out slightly. The alarms quieted, though red lights still flashed. Amelia exhaled shakily. "Good job, Amelia," the voice said again. "Now take a deep breath. What's your airspeed reading?" She squinted at the instruments, recalling her lessons. 260 knots. "Perfect. That's stable. You're doing better than most trained pilots under pressure, okay. Just stay with me." Behind her, Elena whispered, "You're incredible." Amelia didn't feel incredible. She felt terrified. But the controller's voice gave her focus, something solid to cling to amid the chaos. In the cabin, Passengers whispered anxiously, some praying, others watching the closed cockpit door like it held their fate. The elderly woman from Amelia's row sat clutching her pendant, muttering softly, "Please, God, guide that girl's hands." The plane's hum felt louder than ever, a reminder that they were still thousands of feet above the earth, and gravity was waiting below. Inside the cockpit, Amelia's world had narrowed down to the dials, switches, and her own breathing. "Air traffic control, what happened to the pilots?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're not sure, Amelia. There might have been a cabin pressure issue or a medical emergency. Medical teams are on standby in Dubai. Your priority is keeping control until we can arrange landing instructions." Her eyes flicked toward the unconscious men again. The captain's chest still moved faintly. Relief washed through her. They were alive, barely, but alive. "Please tell them to hurry," she whispered. The plane shuddered again as turbulence hit, and Amelia gripped the controls instinctively. "It's okay," the voice said through the static. "Just correct it gently. You've got this." She moved the yoke slightly, countering the drift. The aircraft steadied once more. "Good, Amelia. Excellent control. You were born for this." Her eyes stung with tears, but she blinked them away. "I just want to get everyone home." Down the aisles, a little girl whispered to her mother, "Is the girl flying the plane now?" The mother nodded silently, her face pale but filled with fragile hope. Minutes turned into an hour. The world outside the cockpit was a blur of clouds and fading sunlight. Amelia had become the heartbeat of the aircraft, calm, scared, and unbelievably brave. She didn't think about the passengers anymore, she thought about the task. About every lever, every sound, every light that flickered. She remembered her first flight lesson when her instructor said, "Flying isn't about power, it's about trust, in yourself, in the sky, and in the machine." She understood that now more than ever. Her hands steadied on the controls, her breathing evened out. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt a spark of confidence. "We're going to make it," she whispered. Behind her, Elena placed a hand on her shoulder. "You already saved us." But Amelia didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the horizon, her mind running through every scenario she could imagine. The thought of her mother flashed again, her voice that morning, her hug, her words, "Be brave, my girl." Amelia was brave now, terrified, yes, but braver than she'd ever been. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, the fading sun casting a golden glow across the wings. For a moment, the chaos, the fear, the uncertainty, all of it fell silent. It was just her and the sky, and though she was only 18, in that moment, Amelia Bennett wasn't just a passenger. She was the pilot of hope, steering 250 lives through the thin line between survival and disaster. Inside the cockpit, chaos screamed louder than any storm. Red lights flashed across the instrument panels, alarms blared like sirens of doom, and the plane shuddered violently as it dipped in altitude. Amelia's hands trembled on the control yoke, her pulse pounding in her ears, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The co-pilot's limp body leaned sideways, his headset half off, the faint rise and fall of his chest the only sign of life. The captain lay slumped over the throttle, his arm dangling motionless. The smell of overheated electronics mixed with stale air, creating a haze that stung her eyes. For a second, Amelia thought she might faint. The gravity of what she was facing crushed her chest like a weight she could barely lift. She glanced through the windshield, clouds stretched endlessly ahead, golden light bleeding through in streaks as the plane tilted slightly downward. The horizon looked uneven, slanted. The altimeter needle was spinning faster than it should. Altitude, dropping, airspeed, fluctuating. Panic clawed at her throat. She forced herself to breathe. "Okay, think. You've trained for this, not this exactly, but enough to try." Her voice was shaking, almost inaudible over the blaring alarms. She reached forward, flipping the autopilot switch, hoping it would stabilize the plane. The system flickered, unresponsive. Come on," she muttered. Nothing. The aircraft ignored her, continuing to descend. Her hand shot toward the radio panel. She'd used one before, in her small training aircraft, but this was different, more buttons, more channels, more confusion. She squinted through the blur of tears forming in her eyes, finally pressing the transmit key. "This is Flight 721, she said, her voice trembling. "Both pilots are unconscious. I repeat, the pilots are down. I'm a student pilot. Please help me." Her words hung in the air like a cry for salvation. For several long seconds, nothing but static answered her. The plane groaned again, dipping lower, the horizon spinning slightly as the left wing dropped. Passengers in the cabin screamed. She could hear faint shouts through the closed cockpit door, the sound of fear, helpless and raw. Amelia's throat tightened, but she pressed the button again, harder this time. Please, this is Flight 721. We're losing altitude. Finally, the radio crackled to life. A man's calm, professional voice broke through the noise. Flight 721, this is London Air Traffic Control. Copy that, we read you loud and clear. Please identify yourself. Relief hit her so suddenly she almost cried. My name is Amelia Bennett. I'm 18 years old. I'm a student pilot. I can handle small planes. I've never flown something this big. Okay, Amelia, the voice said. You're doing great. We're going to help you step by step. First, look for the autopilot controls, labeled AP or auto flight. See them? Her eyes darted across the dashboard, frantically scanning. Yes, I see them. Good. Check if autopilot is engaged. She looked. It's off. I tried turning it on earlier, but it didn't respond. That's okay. We'll work without it for now. You're doing fine. What's your current altitude? Amelia glanced at the gauge, trying to steady her trembling vision. We're at 27,000 feet, descending fast. Understood. Pull back gently on the control column, not too much, just to level your descent. Keep your movements small and smooth. She nodded, even though they couldn't see her. Her hands gripped the yoke tighter, sweat slicking her palms. Slowly, carefully, she eased back. The plane resisted at first, heavy and uncooperative, but then the nose lifted slightly. The descent slowed. That's it, the voice said, calm and steady. You've got it, Amelia. You just saved us from losing another few thousand feet. A small sob escaped her throat, relief mixed with terror. She couldn't believe she was doing this. Behind her, Elena stood frozen near the cockpit door, one hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. You're really flying it, she whispered. Amelia didn't answer. She couldn't. Her focus tunneled completely on the instruments. Okay, Amelia, the controller continued. Tell me your airspeed. She looked. 270 knots. Good. That's within range. Now, what's your heading? She checked again. Heading 120. Perfect. That'll keep you on course toward Dubai for now. We're coordinating with other towers ahead. You're doing amazingly well. Just breathe, okay. Amelia exhaled shakily, a tear slipping down her cheek. Okay, I'm breathing. She dared a glance at the two unconscious pilots again. The captain's head tilted slightly as the plane steadied. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. She whispered, hang in there, please. Then turned her attention back to the radio. Air traffic control, the pilots aren't responding at all. What should I do about them? We have medical teams standing by in Dubai, the voice replied. Right now, just keep control of the plane. You're their only chance. Those words sent a chill through her spine. Their only chance. 250 people behind her, children, families, strangers, and she was their only chance. She'd never felt so small, yet so important. The responsibility settled over her like a cloak made of fear and determination. The alarms dimmed as she adjusted the systems. The constant beeping was replaced by a steady hum. The sound of stability. Amelia's breathing slowed a little. Amelia, said the controller, you're doing something extraordinary. You've got everyone's attention down here. We're guiding you all the way in. Her lips trembled. I just don't want to mess this up. You won't. Trust me. Planes are built to fly, you just have to guide them. Now, do you see the vertical speed indicator? Keep that needle as close to 0 as you can. She located it. Okay, it's steadying. Perfect. You're leveling off. Outstanding work. The cabin behind her had quieted slightly. People were still scared, but hope was returning. A few whispered prayers turned into murmured encouragement. Someone said, she's doing it. Someone else began crying softly, not from fear now, but from disbelief that a teenager might actually save them. Minutes passed like hours. The sky outside began to shift colors. Soft amber and violet hues from the descending sun filtered through the clouds. The view was breathtaking, but Amelia couldn't appreciate it. Her entire being was locked into survival mode. Her fingers moved from one control to another as she followed instructions. Adjust trim, maintain throttle, monitor altitude. Every command from the tower felt like a lifeline. And through it all, she stayed calm, or at least, forced herself to sound calm. At one point, the controller asked gently, Amelia, can you tell me how you're feeling? She almost laughed, but it came out as a shaky breath. Scared out of my mind. That's okay, the voice said softly. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what you have to despite the fear. You're doing it. That line hit her hard. She tightened her grip and nodded, even though no one could see. Suddenly, turbulence struck again. The plane jerked violently, throwing Amelia forward against her harness. The alarms blared once more. Elena screamed behind her. Amelia's heart raced. Control, we're shaking again. Hold steady, the tower replied, their tone still calm but urgent. Don't overcorrect. Small movements, Amelia, small movements. She did as instructed, countering the roll with careful pressure. The aircraft responded sluggishly at first, then leveled again. The alarms silenced themselves one by one. That's it, the voice said proudly. That was perfect. You've got instincts, Amelia. Her chest heaved with effort, sweat trickling down her temples. I thought we were going down, she whispered. But you didn't let it happen, the controller said. You've just proven you can handle this. Amelia looked ahead at the clouds parting before her, revealing endless blue sky beyond. A strange calm settled over her. She was still terrified, yes, but something deep inside, something her father had always told her, began to stir. You were made for the sky. She looked again at the captain, unconscious beside her, and whispered, I'm flying your plane, sir. I'll get us home. The radio crackled once more. Amelia, we're coordinating with Dubai Air Traffic Control now. You'll begin descent in about an hour. For now, maintain course and altitude. You're officially the acting pilot of Flight 721. Her throat closed with emotion. She wanted to cry, laugh, scream, all at once. Instead, she just nodded and said softly, copy that. Behind her, Elena placed a hand on her shoulder. You're saving all of us, she said in a trembling voice. Amelia didn't look away from the horizon. Her young face, illuminated by the glow of the setting sun, was set with fierce determination. No, she whispered, I'm just doing what I have to. And as the plane steadied in the open sky, that terrified 18-year-old girl, who only hours earlier had been another passenger on a simple flight, became the hope of everyone on board, the lone heartbeat between disaster and survival, flying a wounded giant through the fading light toward safety. Controllers immediately began guiding her step by step, their calm, steady voices cutting through the storm of fear in Amelia's mind. Maintain altitude. Level the wings. You're doing great, one said, his tone low and deliberate, like someone talking to a frightened child holding a glass of water that might spill at any moment. His voice was her lifeline. Every word from him tethered her to reality, to focus, to survival. Amelia's hands trembled so hard she could barely keep her grip on the yoke, her knuckles white against the black handles. Sweat dripped down her temples. Her throat was dry, but she kept listening, obeying, breathing. The hum of the engines returned to something close to steady. The plane stopped dropping so fast. A few of the red lights on the control panel dimmed, though others still blinked like angry eyes. She took a deep, shaky breath, her voice barely steady enough to respond. Flight 721, maintaining altitude. Wings level. Perfect, Amelia, perfect, the controller replied. Now hold her steady. Small corrections. You're keeping everyone safe. Her lower lip quivered. Okay, I'm trying. You're not trying, he said gently. You're doing it. Amelia exhaled slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. The nose of the aircraft leveled, the horizon straightened. She looked out through the wide windshield, and for the first time since the chaos began, she saw the sky again, clear, endless, and bathed in soft gold. The storm that had surrounded them earlier had broken apart, leaving a clean stretch of air before her. The clouds shimmered in sunlight, and for just a second, it almost looked peaceful. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin was far from calm. People sobbed quietly in their seats. Some whispered prayers under their breath, clutching hands, necklaces, or the edges of armrests. A mother rocked her baby, singing softly to soothe both of them. The elderly woman who had sat beside Amelia before takeoff whispered, Please, God, watch over that brave girl. Even those who didn't believe found themselves praying. Elena, the flight attendant, stood in the aisle with tears streaking her cheeks but her voice steady as she addressed the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay calm. We have contact with air traffic control. Everything possible is being done to ensure your safety. Her words weren't a lie, everything possible was being done. It just so happened that, everything possible, rested in the trembling hands of an 18-year-old girl. Inside the cockpit, Amelia's legs ached from tension. Her hands were locked in position. She could feel every vibration of the engines through her seat, every slight shift of air under the wings. The radio crackled again. "Amelia, how are you holding up?" She blinked rapidly, trying to keep her tears from spilling. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But I'm still flying. That's all you need to do. 1 second at a time. You've got over 200 people trusting you, and we've got you, all the way to the ground." The words wrapped around her like a blanket. She nodded silently and adjusted the trim controls as she'd been taught in her lessons. The aircraft responded smoothly this time, gliding forward as if sensing her growing confidence. Her mind wandered for just a second, to her father, who used to take her to the airfield near their home when she was little. She could still hear his voice. "You know, Amelia, the sky looks empty, but it's alive. You treat it gently, it'll carry you anywhere." She'd smiled back then, watching small planes rise into the blue. Now, those memories came rushing back, not as nostalgia but as strength. She whispered softly, "Okay, Dad. I'll treat it gently." "Amelia, what's your current altitude?" the controller's voice asked. She checked the instruments. 31,000 feet, stable. "Excellent. Let's maintain that for now. You've regained full control. You're officially flying the plane." Her breath caught at those words, "You're officially flying the plane." It didn't feel real. Only hours ago, she'd been just another passenger, looking forward to sunshine and adventure. Now she was responsible for hundreds of lives. She pressed the radio again. "Air traffic control, what happened to the pilots?" "They're still unconscious. We don't know yet, Amelia," came the calm reply. "Could be oxygen deprivation or a medical event. We're arranging for emergency medical teams to meet you upon landing. Focus on flying for now." "Understood," she said quietly, glancing at the slumped figures beside her. The captain's face was pale, his chest barely rising. The co-pilot looked even worse. Amelia forced herself not to think about them as people but as part of the situation, one more element she had to manage. Her brain compartmentalized everything the way her instructors had taught her, one problem at a time. The minutes stretched. She followed every instruction, adjusting flaps slightly, trimming the elevators, checking fuel levels. Her movements were slow but deliberate, cautious but competent. "Good corrections," the controller said. "You're flying smoother now." "Thanks," she murmured, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "Remember to breathe," the voice reminded her. She laughed weakly, more a breath than a sound. "If I breathe too deeply, I might start crying." "That's fine. Crying's allowed. Just don't stop flying." She smiled faintly through her tears. "Deal." Outside, the sky had turned into a breathtaking canvas of pink and gold as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The clouds below glowed like molten metal. The light washed across the cockpit, warming Amelia's face. For a moment, she felt almost at peace, as if the universe had given her a brief pause to gather herself. In the cabin, some passengers began murmuring that the shaking had stopped. People looked out the windows and gasped softly at the view, the sunset, the calm clouds, the gentle hum of stability. Hope began to replace panic. A man whispered to his wife, "Maybe we're going to make it." Another woman clasped her hands together and whispered, "Thank you, God." Elena stepped quietly into the cockpit again. "It's working," she said softly. "They can feel it." Amelia didn't look away from the horizon. "I just have to keep it steady." "You're doing more than that," Elena said. "You're giving them a chance." Amelia swallowed hard. "I'm just following instructions." "Yeah," Elena said, her voice breaking slightly, "but you're the one doing it." The radio came alive again. "Amelia, we're going to prepare for descent soon. But first, let's review your systems. Check your fuel." She looked at the indicators. "Fuel's at 70%. Perfect. Enough to circle if needed. You're in excellent shape." Her hands steadied a little. The longer she stayed in control, the more she felt the aircraft respond to her touch. It was like the plane trusted her now. The control yoke moved fluidly under her palms, the engines hummed in rhythm. The chaos of earlier felt distant, almost like another lifetime. Still, every few seconds, her mind flashed back to the screaming passengers, the pilots collapsing, the alarms. It came in waves, threatening to drown her in panic. Each time, she forced herself to focus on the voice in her ear, the numbers on the gauges, the steady rhythm of her breathing. The controller kept talking, filling the silence with guidance and encouragement. "You're a natural pilot, Amelia. The hardest part's over, you stabilize the aircraft. That's what saves lives." Her throat tightened. "Do you really think I can land it?" A pause. Then the voice said softly, I wouldn't bet against you. The words hit her harder than he probably knew. She blinked fast, her vision blurring for a moment. Okay, I'll keep flying. That's all we need from you right now. One thing at a time. Keep her steady, and we'll get you home. She looked out the window again, where the light was fading into deep orange. The horizon line was perfect now, flat and even, stretching endlessly. She thought again of her father, of her mother waiting for a call that hadn't come yet, of all the people on board counting on her. Every heartbeat was louder than the engine's. She whispered, almost to herself, I won't let them down. Say again, Amelia, the controller asked, not hearing her words clearly. Nothing, she said quickly. I'm just talking to myself. That's fine, just don't argue with yourself, the controller replied, his tone warm, almost teasing. She laughed softly through tears. No promises. The laughter helped. It reminded her she was still human, still alive, still capable of feeling something other than fear. Minutes later, the turbulence was gone entirely. The plane glided smooth as silk. The passengers could feel it too, the shift from chaos to calm. A quiet ripple of applause broke out somewhere in the middle rows, small but sincere. People began whispering again, voices filled with relief instead of terror. Some even smiled through their tears. In the cockpit, Amelia allowed herself one deep breath. For the first time since everything began, she felt like she had a grip on the impossible. Her fear hadn't gone, it had simply transformed into focus. Every nerve in her body was alert, her mind sharp, her heart strong. The controller's voice came one last time before a brief pause in instructions. You've done something extraordinary, Amelia. You've taken a falling plane and turned it into hope. Whatever happens next, remember that. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time, they weren't from fear. She looked out at the clear sky, golden light washing the cockpit, and whispered, thank you. Outside, the clouds parted completely, revealing the glowing curve of the earth beneath them. The sky above stretched vast and endless, pure and blue. It was as if the universe itself had opened its arms, welcoming this brave young girl who refused to give up. Amelia smiled faintly, her trembling hands still firm on the controls. For the first time, she truly believed she might bring them all home. As the runway came into view, Amelia's hands trembled so violently she could feel the vibrations all the way up her arms, but her focus had never been sharper in her life. The city lights of Dubai shimmered far below, a glowing network of gold veins in the blackness. The controller's voice came through the headset, steady, calm, and utterly vital. You're doing perfectly, Amelia. You're lined up with runway 30 left. Begin your descent now. Reduce throttle to 70%. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Reducing throttle, she said, her voice barely steady. She reached forward and pulled the levers back, feeling the engines ease down. The hum shifted pitch, a deep growl turning into a softer roar. The aircraft began to dip lower, nose tilting ever so slightly toward the bright lines of the runway lights below. Good job, said the controller. Now, extend your flaps gradually. That's it, keep the nose level. You're on glide path. The words echoed in her mind like steps in a dance she had only ever rehearsed in tiny training planes. Never like this, never in something this massive, carrying hundreds of lives depending on her next breath. Sweat trickled down the back of her neck. Her throat was dry, but she didn't dare move or blink too long. Through the windshield, the runway lights looked impossibly narrow, like a thread she had to thread with a falling star. The edges of her vision pulsed with adrenaline. Landing gear down, she whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. She reached for the switch and pushed it down. A loud mechanical whir echoed through the cabin, the gears lowering, locking, engaging. In the passenger section, the air was thick with fear and hope. Every seatbelt was fastened. The cabin lights dimmed, reflecting faces pale with tension. A mother held her child so tightly the little girl could barely breathe. An old man crossed himself again and again. The elderly woman who had sat beside Amelia before the chaos whispered to her seatmate, "She's really going to land us. That girl is going to bring us home." The flight attendant, Elena, stood at the front, gripping the jump seat strap so tightly her knuckles turned white. She kept her eyes on the cockpit door, whispering under her breath, "Come on, Amelia. You've got this. Just a little more." Inside the cockpit, Amelia's pulse pounded in her ears. The radio crackled again. "You're 2 miles out. You're aligned. Descent looks perfect. Reduce throttle further, 50%. Keep your rate of descent shallow." "Copy that," she said, voice cracking. Reducing throttle. Holding descent. Excellent. Now, when you're 50 feet above the ground, flare slightly, pull back on the yoke just enough to slow your descent rate. The plane will want to float, but let it. I remember, she said faintly. She remembered her instructor's voice from training flights. The landing isn't about forcing the plane down. It's about letting it fall gently into the Earth's arms. Outside, the runway grew larger, filling the glass with lines of bright white and amber. The lights rushed toward her, faster and faster, as if the world was racing to meet her. The altimeter ticked down, 200 feet, 150, 100. Her breath came in shallow bursts. 50 feet, said the controller. Now flare. Just a touch. She pulled back gently on the yoke. The nose lifted, the engines howled, and the ground rushed up. The wheels hit hard. The plane bounced once, the entire fuselage shuddering with the impact. Gasps erupted from the cabin. Her hands tightened instinctively. Hold it steady, the voice said urgently. Don't fight it, let it settle. The wheels hit again. Another bounce. The plane lurched slightly to the side, tires screeching on the asphalt. Amelia gritted her teeth, forcing herself not to panic. Come on, she whispered. Stay with me. On the third contact, the plane's weight settled onto the landing gear. The vibration smoothed out, the nose dipped forward, and she eased the throttles all the way down. Engage reverse thrust, said the controller. She flipped the switch, and the engines roared backward, slowing the massive jet with a power she could feel in her bones. The aircraft decelerated rapidly, the roar fading into the rhythmic screech of rubber on runway. Then, silence. The plane rolled to a stop. The lights of the runway shimmered outside, reflecting off the windshield. Amelia's hands fell from the yoke, trembling uncontrollably. Her entire body shook with adrenaline and exhaustion. For a long, suspended moment, there was no sound except the ticking of cooling metal and the faint hum of systems still running. Then, from behind the cockpit door, came an explosion of noise, screams, sobs, laughter. The cabin erupted in pure, unfiltered joy. People were crying into each other's shoulders, clapping, shouting, thanking God, thanking her. It was chaos again, but this time, it was beautiful. Amelia sat frozen, staring at the runway lights through tear-blurred eyes. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. It didn't feel real. The plane was stopped. Everyone was alive. She'd done it. Somehow, she'd done it. Elena burst into the cockpit, tears streaming down her cheeks. Amelia, you did it. You landed us. Amelia let out a shaky breath, half a laugh and half a sob. Are we really on the ground? Elena laughed through her tears. Yes, sweetheart, you're on the ground. You're home. Her hands came up to her face as she began to cry, really cry, deep, uncontrollable sobs of relief and disbelief. Her body shook as the weight of what had just happened hit her all at once. She could barely form words. I didn't think I could. I just. Elena knelt beside her and hugged her tightly. You were brave enough to try. That's what saved us. Over the radio, the controller's voice came again, softer now, tinged with emotion. Flight 721, tower confirms full stop. Emergency services are on their way. Amelia, you just made aviation history. She pressed the button weakly. Thank you, for not giving up on me. We never would've, the voice replied. But you're the one who kept them alive. You're the hero today. As she sat there, she looked over at the two pilots, still unconscious but breathing. Medical teams were already approaching the aircraft, flashing lights cutting through the night. Amelia wiped her tears away, still shaking, still trying to process that it was over. In the cabin, passengers were standing now despite the attendants, pleased to stay seated. People hugged strangers. Some knelt in the aisles, crying in gratitude. One man shouted, "She did it. That girl saved us." The cheers grew, spreading like wildfire through the cabin, until it was a chorus, 250 voices chanting her name. Amelia, Amelia, Amelia. She could hear it through the cockpit door. Her heart swelled and broke all at once. She had never imagined being called a hero. She had only wanted to survive. But hearing those voices, those lives she had saved, it made every moment of fear, every tear, every doubt worth it. The emergency vehicles reached the aircraft. Paramedics rushed in through the front door, followed by ground crew and police officers. Flashing lights bathed the cabin in red and blue. Reporters, cameras were already lining the perimeter, news networks scrambling to cover what was happening. When the cockpit door opened and Amelia stepped out, the passengers saw her for the first time since the chaos began. She looked pale, exhausted, streaked with sweat and tears, but her eyes were bright, alive, filled with something beyond words. As she walked down the aisle, the applause grew deafening. People reached out to touch her arm, to thank her, to tell her she was a miracle. One little boy handed her his toy airplane, whispering, "You're my hero." She knelt and smiled weakly. "You keep that," she said softly. "And maybe one day, you'll fly too." Outside, as the paramedics checked her, one of them asked gently, "How old are you, miss?" 18, she said faintly. He blinked, stunned. 18, and you just landed a 747? She smiled tiredly. "I guess I did." When she finally stepped onto the tarmac, the night air hit her face, cool and soft. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and the massive aircraft stood behind her, silent now, a monument to courage and impossible odds. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and her knees nearly gave out from exhaustion. She looked up at the sky she had just conquered. It was dark and endless, filled with stars. She thought of her father's words again, "The sky looks empty, but it's alive. Treat it gently." She whispered into the wind, "I did, Dad. I treated it gently." Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they were tears of peace. The nightmare was over. 250 lives were safe. The headlines would call her a hero, but she knew the truth. She was just a girl who refused to give up when it mattered most. And as the lights of the runway faded behind her, she closed her eyes, letting the sound of cheers wash over her like the hum of engines on a calm, perfect flight home. Fire trucks surrounded the aircraft, their red and blue lights flashing wildly against the night sky, painting the tarmac in streaks of color that blurred in Amelia's tear-filled vision. The sound of engines idling mixed with the frantic shouts of rescue teams and the metallic clatter of equipment being unloaded. She sat frozen in the cockpit, her trembling hands still resting on the controls, unable to process that the plane had truly stopped moving, that the nightmare was finally over. Her breathing came in shallow, shaky bursts, and her heart refused to slow down. Outside, firefighters ran hoses around the wings, checking for fuel leaks, their reflective jackets glowing under the runway lights. Paramedics rushed toward the front of the aircraft, carrying stretchers and oxygen tanks, their voices sharp and urgent over the hum of the cooling engines. Amelia could see them through the cockpit window, their movements fast and focused. One of them looked up and saw her sitting there motionless behind the glass. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and he nodded, just a small gesture that said, "You did it. You're safe now." But Amelia couldn't move. Her entire body felt heavy, almost numb, as though she were still up there in the air, trapped in the moment between fear and survival. The smell of burned rubber and metal filled her nose. The soft clicking of switches and cooling panels was the only sound inside the cockpit now. She turned her head slowly toward the pilots. The captain was pale but breathing, a thin line of color slowly returning to his face. The co-pilot stirred faintly, his fingers twitching. Relief broke over her like a wave, and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. The cockpit door opened behind her, and Elena stepped in, her eyes red but glowing with relief. "They're coming to help them," she said softly, crouching beside Amelia. "The paramedics are here." Amelia nodded, unable to find her voice. Her throat burned from hours of tension and fear. Are they alive?" Elena followed her gaze to the pilots and nodded. "Yes, they're alive. You kept them alive." Amelia let out a broken laugh that turned into another sob. I just followed instructions. I didn't even know if I was doing it right." Elena reached out and took her hand. "You did everything right. You brought us home." Outside, the emergency vehicles formed a glowing half-circle around the aircraft. Reporters had begun to arrive, cameras flashing from beyond the security fence, their lenses catching every movement on the tarmac. The world had already started to hear the story. A passenger plane with 2 unconscious pilots, landed safely by an 18-year-old student pilot. The tower's communications were being recorded and transmitted. Amelia's trembling voice calling for help would soon become one of the most replayed clips in aviation history. The cockpit suddenly filled with the sound of voices, paramedics arriving, asking quick, clipped questions. "She's the one who flew. Vitals on the captain. He's got a pulse. We need oxygen here." The flurry of movement surrounded her, but she sat quietly, her wide eyes watching everything as if from far away. One of the paramedics, a kind-faced woman with her hair tied back, leaned down to her level. "Sweetheart, are you hurt?" Amelia shook her head weakly. "No, just tired." "You did something incredible," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. We're going to take care of everyone now. You can rest. Amelia nodded again, but she didn't move until she saw both pilots being carried out on stretchers, oxygen masks over their faces, medics working quickly. Only then did her body finally seem to accept that it was over. The danger was gone. They had made it. When she stepped out of the cockpit, the first rush of cool night air hit her like a physical touch. It was clean and real and full of life. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked through the aisle. Passengers stood as she passed, some crying, some smiling, all reaching out to her. A man clasped her hand, whispering, "Thank you." A woman pressed her palms together in prayer, tears running down her cheeks. A teenager about her age sobbed and said, "You're the bravest person I've ever seen." Amelia could only nod, her lips trembling. She wanted to tell them she wasn't brave, that she had been terrified every second, that she had almost lost control more times than she could count. But their eyes were filled with gratitude and awe, and she didn't have the heart to say it. She simply smiled weakly and whispered, "We made it." When she finally stepped off the plane, her shoes touched the tarmac and her knees almost gave out. Two paramedics caught her arms, steadying her. The bright lights from the media cameras were already flaring across the night. The air smelled of jet fuel and rain, but also something else, something new and sacred. Survival. A group of airport officials approached her, speaking in a blur of voices. "Miss, are you the one who landed the plane? Do you need medical attention? Can we contact your family?" The words came too fast, and she barely registered them. Her body felt light, disconnected from her mind. One of the firefighters stepped forward, removing his helmet. "You did good, kid," he said simply. "You saved them all." Amelia managed a small, dazed smile. "I didn't save them alone," she said softly. "They helped me. The tower, the passengers, everyone did." Hours later, she sat wrapped in a blanket inside a quiet medical bay, a cup of water trembling in her hands. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, and her eyes rimmed red. A doctor had checked her vitals, everything normal, just exhaustion and adrenaline overload. Outside the glass walls, chaos still buzzed, reporters clamoring for interviews, passengers being reunited with loved ones, officials giving statements. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. Dozens of messages lit the screen, missed calls from her mother, her flight school friends, even her instructor. The first message she opened was from her mother. "Are you safe? Please tell me you're safe." Amelia typed back with shaking fingers, "I'm safe, Mom. Everyone's safe." Moments later, the door opened, and a man in a dark uniform stepped in. It was the chief air traffic controller who had guided her down, the voice that had been her anchor through the storm. His face looked tired but kind, his eyes shining with pride. "Amelia," he said softly. She stood slowly. "You're the voice from the tower." He smiled. "And you're the voice that saved 250 lives." She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "No, I didn't save them. You did. You told me what to do." He stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I guided you, but you were the one in that cockpit, with your hands on the controls, keeping that plane in the sky. You didn't just save them, you saved yourself too." Amelia looked down, tears dripping onto her trembling hands. "I was so scared," she whispered. He nodded. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what you must, even when you're terrified. And you did exactly that." Later, when she was finally allowed to leave, flashes from cameras followed her every step. The world had already given her a name, the Sky Angel. It appeared on news broadcasts, in headlines, on every major platform. 18-year-old student lands passenger plane after pilot's collapse. Reporters called her a miracle. Children wrote her letters. Pilots around the world sent messages of admiration and awe. But Amelia didn't see herself as a hero. When she finally stood outside under the starlit sky, away from the noise, she looked up at the vast, dark expanse that she had once feared and conquered. The stars shimmered like 1,000 watching eyes. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I didn't save them. We all saved each other." Because it wasn't just her, the passengers who kept calm, the air traffic controllers who guided her, the flight attendants who held the chaos together, the ground teams waiting below, they had all been part of a single chain of courage. One that refused to break when the world tilted toward disaster. She thought of the faces on the plane, the crying mother, the praying man, the child clutching his toy airplane. Each of them had carried faith in her, even when she hadn't had it in herself. And that faith had been enough to keep her hands steady on the controls when everything else had been falling apart. Her mother's car arrived to take her home. When she climbed inside, the world outside still buzzed with flashing lights and cameras, but inside, there was silence. Her mother reached out, cupped Amelia's face, and whispered, "My brave girl." Amelia leaned into her mother's shoulder, closing her eyes. "I just wanted everyone to live," she murmured. Her mother's hand tightened around hers. "And because of you, they did." In the days that followed, Amelia's life changed forever. The aviation world honored her. Flight schools offered her scholarships. The passengers sent her hundreds of letters, each one a story of a life that had been given back. One said, "You didn't just land a plane, Amelia. You restored our faith in miracles." She read them all quietly, humbly, her eyes filling with tears. But the letter that stayed with her most came from the captain himself, written weeks later after he recovered. "Dear Amelia, I don't remember much from that night, but I do know this: when everything failed, you didn't. The sky has a way of revealing who we really are, and that night, it revealed the heart of a true pilot. Thank you for bringing us home." Amelia folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. She still dreamed sometimes of the cockpit, of the alarms, of the trembling controls beneath her hands. But when she woke, she didn't wake in fear. She woke knowing she had faced the impossible and found her strength in it. Years later, when she earned her commercial pilot's license, she carried the call sign, "Sky Angel," with quiet pride. Whenever she lifted off the runway and felt the plane rise into the open air, she would glance at the horizon and whisper the same words she had said that night, the ones that defined her forever. "I didn't save them. We all saved